This is Autoline This Week, the show that gets you inside the global automotive industry. Autoline This Week partnered with the Consulate General of Canada in Detroit to produce this episode.
Hi, I'm John McElroy, and thanks for joining us on Autoline This Week. Today's topic is all about entrepreneurs. How do you become an entrepreneur? How do you engender an entrepreneurial culture, really? We've got three experts who are ready to talk about this, including Khanjan Desai. He's the CEO and co-founder of a company called Alchemy, which is a nanotechnology startup. We've got Helge Seetzen. He's the CEO of a company called TandemLaunch. They're a startup foundry, as they call it, or an incubator, really, all focused on multimedia. And then we have Adrien Cote. He's the executive director of a company called Velocity, which does early seed investing for startups. And thanks for joining me here today. I'm going to throw out the first question. Khanjan, why don't we start with you? What is it about entrepreneurs that separate them from other people? I mean, lots of people talk about starting a company and the like, but it takes, I think, a certain personality to be an entrepreneur. What do you think sets such entrepreneurs apart from others?
I think it's the need to make a difference. It's essentially you see a problem, you want to you have a solution in mind, but you just want to exercise the maximum amount of control and influence on implementing and commercializing that solution. So I generally think, I mean, there are comical answers to that as well, but I think at the core is really the need to make a difference.
Okay, Adrien, it's part of it is wanting to make a difference. What else do you think separates entrepreneurs from the rest?
Yeah, problem solvers and builders. I think we work with a lot of individuals that are really keen on making an impact in the world, and they want to do it on their terms. And then as well, you know, they have tons of creative energy and great technical ideas and strategize. And just these are the people that are going to get the best innovation out in the world. That's what I believe. Helge, what do you think?
Yeah, I think both of those answers are spot on. Maybe to add a bit of color, not just what makes people want to be an entrepreneur, but what makes them a successful entrepreneur. You know, wanting to be an entrepreneur is exactly what Adrien and Khanjan just said. Being a successful entrepreneur is the ability to make events happen. It's the ability to not just want to have that impact and want to build something, but rally others around that mandate and enable it, execute it, and affect real change rather than just dreaming of them.
Lots of people want to make a change, and lots of people are excited about ideas, but not many people move on them. Helge, why not? What is it about entrepreneurs that they cut the safety ropes and take the plunge into doing it on their own?
Yeah, so it's exactly about this part about having the ability to create events. So if you want to make something happen, the first step is vulnerability, right? It's not just cutting the safety cord, which is an economic aspect, but it's putting yourself out there, talking to other people about an idea that will get, not necessarily ridiculed, but certainly be criticized, that will have lots of wrinkles because it's just in its early stages. And making yourself vulnerable in that respect is really uncomfortable for a lot of people. And then there's the risk, economic risk and reputational risk and all those other things. And you have to be able to take all that discomfort and get over it. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. And, then there's practical things like you have to raise money and things like that. But most people, I find, get stuck long before that. And it's a self-imposed hurdle, essentially.
What do you think, Khanjan?
I think to some extent, there is also just a calculated risk you take. So for myself, I started my company in my 20s, and I knew that if I got it wrong, the worst thing I was going to lose was a couple of years of my life in my 20s, and I could just go back into corporate life right away. And for others I know who have started their companies in their 30s and 40s, it's often a calculated risk in the form of having a partner who can support the family, or having enough savings so that you can invest the time into your startup. So I agree. I think to some level you have to be able to take the plunge and accept that you're going to be learning a lot on the job, and you won't know 99% of the things that you need to do to be successful at your job. But it's about learning and trying and going out there and being okay with failing and iterating as well.
What do you think, Adrien?
I mean, yeah, both of those answers I agree with, and I think with Velocity, we're very much an incubator. We are founded by the University of Waterloo, and I think in as much as we can introduce people as they start to explore, introduce the concepts of entrepreneurship and what it actually means from a practical level, as early as possible, and when they might be thinking about starting something up, or if they're just curious about innovation, let's demystify that process as fast as possible. So those that may be on the edge of wanting to try something or not try something can do it in the most informed way. And I think we can unlock a lot of opportunity and a lot of innovation in this world by doing more of that.
Adrien, what is it about? Some people have very successful careers in the corporate world. Mm-hmm. They decide they want to make a jump to a startup. In fact, we're seeing this right now in the automotive industry with EV startups. They're very successful in the corporate world. They go into a startup and they flounder. A lot of them fall flat on their face. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think the approach to delivering innovation through a large enterprise is different than delivering innovation by building a company. And, there's good overlap between the types of behaviors you need to have. You need to be able to, you got to drive at something, you got to rally resources to yourself. But how you do that in a large company is different than how you do it as an independent founder building a startup.
Mm-hmm. Helge, what can you add to that?
Yeah, there's a challenge when you've built your professional skill set on the strength of the brand and reputation of the company that you've worked at, and then come to a startup, and it just that safety wheel isn't there, right? And it's not necessarily that startups are harder or easier, or corporate careers are just very difficult too. It's just there's a huge difference. Let's say you're a sales leader and you work at IBM, right? Every place you call will pick up your phone because they see IBM pop up on the call display. And when you say something like, we will sell you this product for $50,000, everybody will just assume that it's going to get delivered and it's warranted and it's supported, and you won't even have to sell that. It will just be built in, right? And when that same human being with the same skill sets then comes in startups, makes that same phone call to that same customer, step one, the phone call won't get picked up because it's some random number and they go, what the hell is this? And then step two, they've got to ramble on about what their company does and who they are. And people will oh, wow, this is never going to get supported. And so the same activity gets a lot harder because all you have is your personal skill sets. You don't have that sort of support infrastructure, that brand, that reputation of your large institution. And this is particularly true. You mentioned automotive. So a good number of our companies that we've built are in the automotive sector. One of them got acquired a little bit ago by Faurecia, and a bunch of others that are heavily involved with automotive players. And the auto industry is almost an extreme of this, right? Because the automotive sort of manufacturer, tier 1, tier 2 supply chain is very kind of a closed community. Reputation matters a lot. Every time I talk to anybody at a tier 1, they go, well, these are the good car companies, these are the bad car companies. And everybody talks to somebody at a car maker, they say the same about the tier 1s and tier 2s. And people sort of rotate through that ecosystem. So that people don't even realize that they have all these massive reputational benefits behind them until they come to startup, and then everybody ignores them. And that can be harsh. They can also be harsh on the person. I've seen this a lot where people jump into the entrepreneurial sphere and they get totally disillusioned very quickly because everybody's so mean to them.
Khanjan, what can you add to it?
Yeah, I think there are three elements to it. The first is really the idea. Some ideas are easier to start a company around. Others require a significant amount of infrastructure. Some ideas are riskier. Some ideas have a higher or lower probability of success. The second is execution in my head, which is really, can you execute on the idea? Can you hire the people you need? Can you build a team and lead the team, set the right product development roadmap, commercialization strategy, fundraising, et cetera, et cetera. And so that is usually the meat of it. Is really you see multiple different companies go after the same idea, but some fail to execute and some do. And the third, I think, is just luck. Sometimes your timing is wrong. Sometimes the right person notices you. And generally, I think we can see the same idea have very different outcomes. And usually I find it's execution and luck that factor in.
Khanjan, what's the biggest mistake most entrepreneurs make? What is it when you look at a company and you see something, you go, uh-oh, this doesn't look good?
I think I generally don't look at companies. I typically look at the founders, and I find it's usually founders who make the mistake of listening to very generic or flyby advice. Each company is different. Even the same idea will have different teams, different strategies, different business models. And so it's really important to trust your gut, in my opinion, and not listen to the groupthink that might be out there. So for us, once we kind of figured out our own path, we just felt more and more comfortable, even though it wasn't the standard VC path, it wasn't the standard growth model as well. So I think it's just at the end of the day, you have to trust your own instincts, do your own research, and just go with that, because that's something that you can't regret. But you could kick yourself for listening to someone else that may not have meant anything malicious. We're trying to help you, but just didn't know any better at that time.
Adrien, do you see any common mistake that entrepreneurs make?
Well, I'll speak to it from like the very, very early start of the journey, where where you have a group or a team just really thinking about a technology that could be helpful in the world, and even before perhaps a company is even incorporated, is just being sure that they're thinking about how their customers will ultimately buy it, and will they buy it. I think sometimes we see at the very, very early stages, companies form where they're really indexed around building the technology and not doing that lockstep with what the customer will ultimately buy. But then at the same time, teams that do it properly and really figure out quickly what customers will buy, they do well.
Mm-hmm. Helge, what can you add to it?
Well, I started my first startup in my undergrad, and it was a deep technology play, and built a series of companies, and now building more companies in our business model. And so I've made just about every mistake you can probably make, and nevertheless sort of got through it. So it's a long list that we can probably spend the whole rest of the episode going through those mistakes. But losing line of sight of what matters is a typical one. I think the stack order, there's some argument whether customer comes first or team comes first, but those two are clearly at the top of the list. Product comes underneath that, and technology comes underneath that, and that hurts my soul as a deep tech entrepreneur. But it is just factually, that's the stack order, right? And making sure that every day you work on something that is up on that stack, that you find the right people to join you, or that you find the right customer and position towards that. It's a skill set, and it's very easy, and it speaks to what we talked about earlier about that risk and the exposure. Those are also the scarier parts, right? Because customers can say no to you, and team members can walk out on you. Whereas if all you do is sit on a computer and type in code, it can't talk back, right? Worst case, you get a debug kind of situation. And so never losing sight of that is, I think, key. And conversely, the mistake a lot of people make is turtle and just focus on the stuff that they can easily control.
Mm-hmm. Helge, you mentioned, you wish technology was at the top of the list, but it's not. And yet most entrepreneurs are technical people. They've come up with some new kind of product or service or the like. What are the signs that an entrepreneur should be on the lookout for when it's time for him or her to turn the reins over to somebody else that can really run the business?
Yeah, so in our business model, we synthetically form teams and of both technologists and commercial operators and so forth. And so this is something we ask ourselves all the time, right? Because we have, we're not, our ventures are not organically grown, they're synthetically created. And so we have editor's control, as it were, over how we compose the teams. And it's a very delicate balance, because you want a continuous voice of the technology domain in the strategic thinking of your company, but you want equally a voice of the sort of corporate side, people, finance, divorce, and you want a voice of the customer side, right? And blending those is critical. I think my instinct is you have to step back when you lose the ability to recruit talent above you. And so there's sort of a natural, as a company scales, there's a natural breakpoint where the talent that you can attract will at some point be rate limited by your own skill set, right? And so if you find yourself making concessions, for example, in the sales leadership that you're attracting because the really high tier salespeople don't want to work for someone like you that just doesn't appreciate their domain, then it's time to move on. Well, not move on necessarily out of your company, but bring in a partner who can build a commercial organization at that stage. But of course, that is only relevant when you're actually at the stage of selling, right? If you're deep in the R&D stage, that's less a critical restriction.
Right. Adrien, what kind of warning signs would you suggest to an entrepreneur who should decide to become the CTO, not the CEO?
Yeah, I might take a different view to this because we work very much with technical founders, and we love working with technical founders. And I think, of the companies that have been supported by Velocity, most of those founders have remained in the key leadership roles of their companies. So I think there's a really good, pathway for, and Khanjan was speaking to this about like finding your own way to build your company and knowing yourselves and taking that knowledge of yourself and figuring out how to fill the gaps. So I think technical founders are great, and we can, because they're going to be also the ones that are really passionate about the technology. They're going to be the ones that have lived it. And I believe people have the capability to move beyond that technical orientation and move to also be really great operators from the business side.
Khanjan, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, I mean, we kind of perform an internal assessment on an annual basis, my co-founder and I, because our core value is that, or thesis is that our job is to deliver value to our shareholders. And at the end of the day, as the biggest shareholders in the company, we want to make sure that we are not getting in our own way. So as the company matures and goes through its growth curve, as Helge was mentioning, what you need to do as a CEO or a CTO changes. In the early days, you're often trying to build a technology. As a CEO, you're trying to fundraise. You generally don't have a product team, so you're the product manager by default. But as you turn that corner and start focusing on revenue growth, you need to hire people to surround you with the responsibilities that you're not great at. So being self-aware and recognizing your own shortcomings. So in our case, I've taken the time to realize that, yes, I can lead our revenue generating operations, but it would be better off for me to have a chief revenue officer whose focus is to lead all of our growth operations. And so it's really important to be self-aware, but at some point you have to look at yourself and ask, are you growing slower than your business needs to grow? And are you the person limiting it? And if so, it's time for you to step aside, as Helge mentioned. And it's an assessment we perform on an annual basis, probably 2 times a year, my co-founder and I, because it's really important like I mentioned earlier, there are 99% of things that you will not have the skill set for when you start a company. And so either you have to learn them quickly enough, or you need to step aside and have someone else perform that responsibility for you.
As you all know, it's a lot of fun to be around entrepreneurs. I mean, they're so positive. They just exude confidence. They're always upbeat. But we've also, again, coming back to the automotive industry, seen this in some of the startups. They overpromise. I mean, they get out ahead of their skis, so to speak. What kind of advice can you give to entrepreneurs of maintaining a balance between, of course, you got to be positive. You got to be pushing forward all the time, but also approach it with a sense of reality?
I'll go at this right away, because obviously in the automotive industry, there is the snake oil salesman term, right? And it comes from overpromising and under-delivering. So, we in our particular industry as well and segment, our competitors have made that mistake, and that's exactly where we've stuck to being humble and under-promising, over-delivering, and consistently just focusing on caring about the customer. So it's really about, if your customer is happy with you, then your company is going to be successful at the end of the day. And so managing expectations is very, very critical. So always under-promise, over-deliver. The answer was in your question there, but that's what we focused on, and it's helped us become the leader in our category within a very short amount of time, just because the market has grown to trust us. in our industry as well, we get a successful customer, a happy customer in Colorado will give us a referral to someone in Alberta, Canada, or across the world in Qatar. And so we've learned that our industry is so interconnected that if you get something wrong, the word will spread very quickly. And the automotive industry is notorious for that. So it's very, very important to make sure you start off on the right foot and don't talk yourself into a corner.
Anyone else wants to add to that?
Yeah, I think the degree to which you can be ambitious in your promises, never make promises that you have no hope of achieving, right? But there's a range of ambition where you're adding a bit more uncertainty into your promise as you're making it. That slider depends very much on the audience and on the consequence of failure to that audience, right? If you're a part supplier or a technology supplier into a very long design cycle industry like automotive, failure has catastrophic ripple effects both on your partner and on their ecosystem, and therefore on you and your brand, and that's a no-go, right? On the other hand, if you're pitching, let's say, for a venture capital fund, they have some degree of disappointment baked into their calculus, right? It's just they understand that the risk is part of the equation, and VC funds don't sit there and go like, oh my God, this company didn't hit their quarterly milestone. That has never happened to me in my entire history in my life, and it's horrifying, right? It's par for the course. And so, depending on your audience, you want to sort of dial in your ambitiousness of your statement, because you also need it on the other hand. You need to put stakes in the ground a little bit further towards down the slope, to use your ski analogy, hoping that you throw the puck out and then hope to get where it's going.
Yeah, that's right. Adrien, when I look at entrepreneurs, big successful ones, including the automotive industry, they're overwhelmingly men. And what advice would you have of trying to get more women into this? And particularly, women are one thing, but if you talk about Black Americans, Black Canadians, there's even fewer of them. What needs to be done to encourage more of them to get into an entrepreneurial culture?
Yeah, this is something that we at Velocity have invested a lot of our energy in helping a more diverse group enter into the entrepreneurship journey. And it really boils down to, at least where we've worked on it, is making sure that the community and the culture that we are generating within the Velocity ecosystem is really inclusive. And what that means is that those that don't necessarily identify as male or identify as a Caucasian male can find their way through our systems. And so they see other individuals that have been successful down this path, and being very attuned to the different approaches that different individuals will take to building a company. And so we've been able to very humbly been able to increase the number of people that identify as female into Velocity, and also allying and working with other organizations that, for example, support Black entrepreneurship, so that we can learn from their work and support them as they wish, as they look to bring other groups into the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Helge, you got anything to add to that?
Well, I'm a trouble causer in that regard already, even in this very own taping, in this very own show.
Yeah, let me set that. Helge didn't want to come on because it was only going to be men on the panel. Mm-hmm. But here's your chance to help rectify some of that.
To help rectify that. Yeah, I do have. So as John mentioned, I have a standing policy to, at the very least, send a note of caution if I see an all-male show or panel, because I do think the first step is representation. Now, admittedly, I made that comment 24 hours before the show and didn't give you a lot of opportunity here, because that's the first time when I saw the attendee list. So I do think representation matters. And so in our shop, we're very deliberate about this topic. So it's not just kind of a conceptual value statement. We, through very deliberate action, TandemLaunch itself, my firm itself, is fully blended 50-50 across the lines. And I, with all respect for, obviously we also have non-binary components of ours, but we're fully blended through the system. We also pursue a similar approach. As I mentioned earlier, when we build companies, we actually compose the teams. So the vast majority of our teams have a diversity mix in them, whether it's by self-identified gender or by ethnic background or by other kind of elements. As my talent team knows, one of the ways to push on that as a CEO is to be deliberate about it, whether it's on panels like this or in the hiring process. So one of the habits I have, for example, is whenever we try to fill a position, I generally don't start the interview process unless the talent organization presents a blended slate. And I found simple steps like that, because it can help tremendously, because otherwise it's very easy to slip into the sort of default track of ending up with an all-white male trajectory.
Yeah. Look, I got a lot more questions here, but we're out of time, I'm afraid. I really appreciate your insights here. This is very good. I hope there's a bunch of people who are considering to be entrepreneurs and have learned a thing or two. Khanjan, Helge, Adrien, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Autoline This Week partnered with the Consulate General of Canada in Detroit to produce this episode.